Last time we spoke about Feng Yuxiang and Zhang Zongchang. Both men were born into poverty, rose through the ranks in the military, earning popularity. Feng Yuxiang became known for his integrity and his generosity. He played a pivotal role during the Gii Revolution and the subsequent warlord era, often switching allegiances opportunistically. Feng Yuxiang embraced Christianity. He enforced discipline amongst his troops, earning the nickname the Christian General. On the other side of the shoulder, Zhang Zongchang became infamous for his brutality and excesses as the Dogme General. His rule over Shandong Province was marked by tyranny, corruption, and lavish indulgences. While Feng Yuxiang focused on discipline, education, and infrastructure, Zhang Zongchang oppressed his subjects, enriched himself and his inner circle. Feng Yuxiang was often portrayed favorably, while Zhang Zongchang reveled in his notorious reputation. Ultimately, they were emblematic figures of a tumultuous warlord era, shaping the course of modern Chinese history. This episode is Meet the Southern Warlords. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War Channel over at YouTube. Check out my 2-hour-long documentary on China's warlord era. It's like this podcast, just with a bit more comedy. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where you can find exclusive podcasts. For as little as $2 a month, you get access to about 18 plus and ongoing exclusive podcasts over there. In about a week, I'm going to be putting up a poll to see what next month's subject will be. So if you join quick, you can join that poll. So 2 episodes ago, I introduced you all to the Northern Warlords. The father of warlords, Yuan Shikai, basically created them all. When Yuan Shikai built his Beiyang army, many of his best officers became the Northern Warlords after his death. Thus, the Northern faction, as it sometimes is referred to, really was just an elite club of Beiyang generals who simply were vying for power. They were all scrambling to fund their private armies, and whoever at any given time had the strongest force was able to exert control over the Beiyang government, located in Beijing. Within this dynamic, there was a quasi-balance of power going on. For most part, it was dominated by the 3 largest cliques in the north, the Anhui clique, the Zhuli clique, the Fengtian clique. Yet, this is really only applied to northern China. Going back in time somewhat, you will remember when Yuan Shikai stole the presidency, this led to multiple rebellions, notably sprouting in the southern provinces. Dr. Sun Yat-sen stepped down from the provisional presidency, but he had not given up on his dream of a real republic for China. After the assassination of Song Jiaoren in March of 1913, many believe Yuan Shikai had ordered the hit. Yuan Shikai proceeded to abuse his power, and this led to southern provinces declaring independence. The first was Jiangxi, followed by Jiangsu, Anhui, Shanghai, Guangdong, Fujian, and so forth. This all culminated with the Second Revolution of 1913. Unfortunately for the rebels, Yuan Shikai's Beiyang army yet again proved their might, achieving a complete victory over their revolutionary uprisings. KMT loyalist politicians still refused to submit to Yuan Shikai, so he simply dissolved parliament, and he began reorganizing China using loyal military governors in the provinces. The KMT may have been dissolved, but they were not down for the count. After Yuan Shikai proclaimed himself emperor, Dr. Sun Yat-sen established the Chinese Revolutionary Party, but this time his old friends and colleagues refused to join him, such as Huang Xing, Hu Hanmin, Chen Jiongming, and Wang Jingwei. At this point, they had all seen it all before. Every time they created a movement against Yuan Shikai, he simply crushed them, so they didn't want to be part of it. As a result, Dr. Sun Yat-sen lost the limelight, He went back into exile, but he was biding his time. After Yuan Shikai's death, Dr. Sun Yat-sen returned to China, where he formed a military junta at Guangzhou to oppose the Beiyang government. The military junta held a vote, electing Dr. Sun Yat-sen as Generalissimo. Wu Tingfeng was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tang Xiaoyi as Chief Finance Officer, although he did not accept the position. Cheng Biguang became the Chief Naval Officer, and Hu Hanmin became the Chief Transportation Officer. One of the first actions of this junta was to denounce Duan Qire and his colleagues as rebels, and they vowed they would reunify China in a grand northern expedition. With this proclamation, the Constitutional Protection War had officially begun. The war, or better called a movement for now, was basically the KMT's third revolution. It was, put simply, to defeat the Beiyang government. However, not everyone saw eye to eye. In late 1917, many officials such as Tang Jiyao, Mao Rangxin, Lu Rongting, and Tang Xiaoyi convened a meeting with Southwestern Warlords. The purpose of the meeting was to see if they could recognize the Beiyang government and form a coalition with them. Basically, they were seeking to compromise with the Northern Warlords. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was outraged when he found out, and he placed blame on the Southwestern Warlords, who he believed were sabotaging the junta. He resigned angrily in May of 1918, going yet again into exile, this time in Shanghai. Now, while in Shanghai, he found supporters, and October the 10th of 1919, he would resurrect the KMT. After this point, Dr. Sun Yat-sen would be in conflict with the Southern Warlords, basically vying to control the southern provinces as bases of power. Initially, this would be around Guangzhou and Guangdong. Now, as most of you probably already know, while Dr. Sun Yat-sen founded the KMT, it ultimately would be inherited by another man, named Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was born on October the 31st in Shiko, Zhejiang Province. He descended from a family of salt merchants. Early in his life, he became interested in the military. He lived during a very rough time. China had suffered military defeats, natural disasters, famine, rebellion en masse, unequal treaties, and such. It was the century of humiliation, after all. 1906, after his first visit to Japan, he began pursuing a military career. He enlisted in the Baoding Military Academy that year, and then he went to the Tokyo Shinbugeiko, a preparatory school for the IJA Academy for Chinese students. While there, he became a revolutionary seeking to end the Qing dynasty so that a Han-led Chinese republic could emerge. In 1908, he befriended Chen Jiongming, and it was Chen who introduced him to the Dongme Way. After graduating from the Tokyo Shinbugeiko, Chiang Kai-shek served in the IJA from 1909 to 1911. When Cheng heard of the Wuchang uprising, he rushed back to China, intending to serve as an artillery officer. He led a regiment in Shanghai under Chen Jiongming. Then in 1912, there was a conflict between Chen Jiongming and Tao Chengjiang, a revolutionary alliance leader who opposed Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Historians differ on what exactly happened, but it is possible Chiang Kai-shek had a hand to play in the assassination of Tao. Regardless, Chiang rose through up the ranks, and he continued to serve under Chen Jiongming. Now, Chen Jiongming had friends in the underworld, such as the Green Gang, led by Shang. The Green Gang was a criminal syndicate in Shanghai, and again, historians differ to what extent, but it does seem Chiang Kai-shek brushed shoulders with them quite often. Chiang Kai-shek became a founding member of the KMT, but found himself on the losing end of the Second Revolution in 1913. He fled to Japan in exile, but he also secretly traveled to Shanghai through the international settlement. It's said there he began working with the underworld groups like the Green Gang. On May the 18th of 1916, Yuan Shikai had Chen Jiongming assassinated, prompting Chiang Kai-shek to succeed him as the leader of the KMT within Shanghai. In 1917, when Dr. Sun Yat-sen came back, Chiang Kai-shek quickly joined up with him, cultivating a spot as his number two. Now, I don't want to give away the future episodes, so I'm going to stop it there. But basically, that was the KMT clique for now. The next clique we'll be talking about, as you may have guessed, is of course the Chinese Communist Party. Now, we talked quite a bit about its foundation, but for just a little refresher, after the May 4th movement of 1919, numerous foreign ideologies had flooded into China. One happened to be Marxism. The Russian Revolution had a profound effect on China. Hundreds of thousands of laborers during World War I had gone over to Russia, and they found themselves stuck in their civil war. They came back and brought with them what they had learned there. Two men in particular were greatly inspired by Marxism, Chen Jiongming and Li Dajiao. They were also the first two prominent Chinese figures to endorse Leninism and for a worldwide revolution to take place. They ushered in the New Culture movement, then they aided the May 4th movement, but by 1920 they both became very skeptical about reforming the current political situation of China. In 1921, the CCP was founded with the help of the USSR. The founding National Congress of the CCP was held between July the 23rd to the 30th of 1921, with only 50 members, amongst whom were Li Dajiao, Chen Jiongming, and a young Mao Zedong. The CCP grew quickly, originally being held in a house in the Shanghai French concession, until they were caught by the police. They moved to Jiaxing of Zhejiang Province, electing Chen Jiongming as their first general secretary. Chen Jiongming became something akin to China's Lenin, and certainly the CCP continued to ally themselves to the USSR, for both of them had a common enemy, the Empire of Japan. For those who don't know, the Empire of Japan was the most anti-communist nation in history, more so than even Nazi Germany. Again, just like with the KMT, when Chen Jiongming and Li Dajiao were the initial leaders, Mao Zedong would inherit the leadership. Mao Zedong was born December the 26th of 1893 near Shaoshan in Hunan Province. His father was an impoverished peasant who grew up to be one of the wealthiest farmers in Shaoshan. Mao Zedong grew up in a rural area of Hunan, and he stated in his memoirs he was regularly beaten by his father, who was a very strict man. His mother, Wen Qimei, was a devout Buddhist, and Mao would follow in her footsteps, trying to become a Buddhist but ultimately abandoning the path as a teenager. He received a Confucian-based education, and his family arranged a marriage when he was about 17 years old to one Liu Yixiu, ultimately uniting their landowning families. Mao Zedong refused to acknowledge the marriage, and he quickly moved away. The poor Liu was shamed by this, and she would die in 1910. Mao Zedong was a voracious reader. He loved the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and the Water Margins from a very young age, and he continued to read whatever he could get his hands on. Eventually, his reading led him to a political awakening. He began reading Adam Smith, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Charles Darwin, Thomas Huxley, Montesquieu, and other Western works. He was also quite interested in history. He took a particular interest in Napoleon Bonaparte and George Washington. Mao Zedong moved to Changsha for middle school education in 1911, where he came into contact with a revolutionary fever of the time. He was inspired by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, even wrote about how he thought he would become president in a school essay. Mao Zedong, like many others, cut off their queues during the Gii Revolution. Mao found himself joining a real army as a private soldier, but he never saw any real combat. In 1912, he resigned from being a soldier and discovered socialism from a newspaper. Mao then enrolled in a police academy, but he dropped out. He then tried a soap production school, a law school, an economics school, and a government-run middle school, dropping out of all of them. No, instead, he spent his time in Changsha's library reading classical liberal works. Once his father figured out he was basically doing nothing but reading, he cut his allowance, forcing Mao Zedong to move into a hostel. Mao then tried to become a teacher, and he enrolled in the first normal school of Changsha. While there, he befriended Professor Yang Changjia, who introduced him to the newspaper, The New Youth, by Chen Jiongming. Mao became inspired, and he organized an association for student self-government that formed protests against school rules. He published articles in The New Youth beginning in 1917, and he joined the Society of Study of Wang Fuji, a revolutionary group in Changsha. He began reading about World War I, finding solidarity with the stories of soldiers, but he also read about the stories of workers. After graduating in 1919, he immediately moved to Beijing, where his mentor, Yang Qingjia, had a job at Peking University. Yang got him a job as an assistant librarian to none other than Li Dajiao. From here, Mao Zedong became more and more influenced by Marxism, reading about the Russian Revolution from The New Youth, and by books written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Mao Zedong joined Li Dajiao's study group, becoming more and more enthralled with Marxism. He returned to Changsha working as a primary school teacher, while also organizing protests and promoting the new culture movement there. Mao helped organize a general strike in Hunan province, before he returned to Beijing to visit the terminally ill Yang Yangjia. After this, Mao moved to Shanghai, where he met up with Chen Jiongming and some prominent KMT members. Mao would brush shoulders with a lot of KMT members quite often, and he became one of the founding members of the CCP. Again, just like with Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT, I don't want to give away too much of future events, so that will be it for the CCP clique. It's actually rather odd to call the KMT or the CCP cliques. They technically weren't cliques, but for the matter of, this podcast, it makes sense to say so. Now, the next group was the Yunnan clique, who were born out of the Xinhai Revolution when Tai Le declared Yunnan independent. Tai Le had been the commander of the 37th Brigade of the new army there. After the Xinhai Revolution, Tai Le tossed his lot in with Yuan Shikai, leaving behind Tang Jiyao to govern Yunnan. When Yuan Shikai initiated Operation Walrus Emperor, Tai Le covertly departed Beijing and he returned to Yunnan province to get the old gang back together. He was nearly assassinated on November the 11th, but he managed to flee to Japan and then to Yunnan. Once he was back in Yunnan, he established the local National Protection Army to fight against Yuan Shikai. Tai Le declared Yunnan independent again and quickly invaded southern Sichuan province. Yuan Shikai sent his Beiyang army south, but found this time his army was less willing to fight. After Yuan Shikai's death, Tai Le retained his position as Governor General over Yunnan and Governor over Sichuan province. The National Protection War had bolstered Tai Le as a sort of national hero. However, disaster struck in 1916 when he suddenly died of tuberculosis. Rather ironically, he kind of pulled a Yuan Shikai in this matter because he will create warlords from his death. His chief lieutenant, Tang Jiyao, inherited his mantle. Tang Jiyao had brushed shoulders with Dr. Sun Yat-sen, helping him set up his new KMT in Shanghai, and he would remain a KMT loyalist. For the most part. No one's ever truly 100% loyal. Tang Jiyao had brushed shoulders with the Green Gang also, who helped him set up an opium trade in Yunnan province. Now, opium grew exceptionally well in Yunnan province. Its climate was perfect for the plant. Like most of the cliques I will soon be talking about, events unfolded in northern China that led the southern provinces to feel another government was required. A few rival governments would actually come and go, but the first significant one would be established in Guangzhou, and Tang Jiyao joined its committee. This, of course, is the same junta that Dr. Sun Yat-sen set up. Within this government, a political war was fought amongst the numerous cliques, including Dr. Sun Yat-sen. As for those other cliques that would do political battle, one would be the Guizhou clique. The Guizhou clique was founded by Liu Shanshu, who was born in Xinyi of Guizhou. Liu was born into a landlord family, who were heavily involved in leading local militias during the late 19th century. He, alongside his cousin Liu Xianqian, were military men, like their father before them, Liu Guanli, who had been a regimental commander who helped suppress the Hui uprisings in the region. Liu Guanli bolstered his family's name to the point the family became heavily dominant within the military forces of Guizhou. During the Wuchang uprising, Guizhou was tossed into a panic. Liu Xianshu went to the capital to help suppress the revolution. Meanwhile, Zhang Beilin, a Tongmenghui leader in Guizhou, alongside others stormed the capital and forced the governor, Feng Yuxiang, to step down. On November the 4th, they declared Guizhou independent. However, the wannabe revolutionaries failed to take measures to protect their gains, and soon, Feng Yuxiang was fighting back. Liu Xianxu found himself appointed as the chief of staff of the Privy Council of a provisional government. Thus emerged a battle between the revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries. The counter-revolutionaries sought assistance and turned to the recently emerged strongman, Tai Le of Yunnan. They asked him to help by invading Guizhou to stop the crisis. Tai Le dispatched Tang Jiyao and some troops to enter Guizhou rather peacefully, and he began to organize proper governance. Then Tai Le received panic messages from Tongmenghui Guizhou members asking him not to meddle in Guizhou affairs, and with Sichuan at the time looking more appetizing, he simply backed off. Tai Le ordered Tang Jiao to divert his forces and simply march into Sichuan province. However, Tang Jiao complained that in order to comply, he had to take a route going through Guizhou, and this resulted in his army being chased by revolutionary forces. Well, that's one way of stating the story, of course. The other is that Tang Jiao simply sought to conquer Guizhou. Regardless, Liu Xianxi helped Tang Jiao launch a successful coup against the current Guizhou junta. And thus, Tang Jiao became the military governor of Guizhou on March 4th of 1912, and Yuan Shikai recognized this a few months later. For his role, Liu Xianxi was appointed the Minister of War. Tang Jiao did what all decent dictators do. He massacred all revolutionary forces he could catch in the province. While Tang Jiao was at the head, Liu Xianxi used his new political power to begin placing family members in prominent positions. In the meantime, Tang Jiao treated Guizhou like a fiefdom, forbidding modernization efforts and preventing any development of the KMT there. It goes without saying Tang Jiao was not beloved in Guizhou. In November of 1913, Tai Le was placed under house arrest and stripped of all of his ranks, so Tang Jiao ran back to Yunnan to grab his position as governor. Yes, this guy was quite the opportunist. This left the mantle of Guizhou to fall into the hands of Liu Xianxi. When Yuan Shikai declared himself emperor, Liu Xianxi initially kept Guizhou neutral, but as the situation looked more and more dire for Yuan Shikai, he bandwagoned and declared independence on January the 27th of 1916. Liu Xianxi sent forces to fight in the National Protection War. Then after Yuan Shikai's death, the Beiyang government appointed Liu Xianxi as the military governor over Guizhou. From there, Liu Xianxi had pretty much dictatorial power, and he soon went to work forming his own Guizhou clique. To make matters even more complicated, within the Guizhou clique were the Xingyi clique of the Liu family, because they all came from Xingyi, and the Tongzhi clique, led by Zhou Xiqiang. Basically, it was just two families that were fighting over dominance, leading to a cycle of assassinations followed by seizures of power. Now we come to the old and new Guangxi cliques. The old Guangxi clique came about after Governor Chen Bingqun declared Guangxi independent during the Wuchang Uprising. After the rebellion, Yuan Shikai installed Lu Rongting as the military governor of Guangxi, and during the Second Revolution, Lu remained loyal. Yet when Yuan Shikai went Walrus Emperor mode, Lu bandwagoned with Tai Le and Tang Jiao. Meanwhile, Long Qiguang proclaimed Guangdong Province independent, and after Yuan Shikai's death, Guangxi and Guangdong found themselves at war. The war largely came about when Dr. Sun Yat-sen split from the Guangzhou government. He had dispatched a subordinate, Chen Jiongming, to seize Guangzhou and effectively get rid of the Guangxi warlords. Both Long Qiguang and Chen Jiongming were KMT loyalists, thus this led Lu Rongting into a bitter war with Guangdong, and even Yunnan province got involved. The whole mess saw the old Guangxi clique beaten severely. Again, I'm trying not to tell too much of the story, because it's going to be covered in future podcasts, but it was a hell of a mess. There was a lot of backstabbing involved. After the Guangxi-Guangdong Wars, yes, plural, Li Xiangren, Bai Changxi, and Huang Shaowang formed the new Guangxi clique alongside a brand new Guangxi army. Li Xiangren was its commander-in-chief, Huang Shaohong its deputy commander, and Bai Changxi its chief of staff. They all worked together to kick Guangdong forces out of Guangxi, and Li Xiangren emerged the military governor over Guangxi. The new Guangxi clique came about during the formation of a new coalition that I can't really get into here. While both the old and new Guangxi cliques were on a smaller side, they would take part in the reunification of China. Next, although we spoke already a bit about them, was the Guangdong clique. Long Qiguang would die in 1918, leaving the mantle to fall onto Chen Jiongming. Chen Jiongming had joined the Tongmenghui in 1906, and he participated in a coup attempt in 1910 in Guangzhou. During the Gii Revolution, Chen Jiongming was part of another uprising in Guangzhou. After this, Chen Jiongming received the post as commander-in-chief of the Guangdong army, and he fought for the KMT. He did, however, butt heads with Dr. Sun Yat-sen, particularly over the direction of reform the KMT should take. Dr. Sun Yat-sen sought to unify China by force and institute change through a centralized government based on a one-party system. Chen Jiongming sought a multi-party federalist system, with Guangdong being the model province, and he hoped for a peaceful reunification of China. There would be a split between the two men, and it would be quite violent. The Guangdong clique, like the old and new Guangxi clique, was again a small part of something bigger cooking in the south. The next one is the Sichuan clique, which consisted of a loose group of smaller, I would call them petty warlords, each in their own regions within Sichuan. Each of these petty warlords had their own defensive zone, with their own police force, their own political base, and their own economic base. There were not many large conflicts. It mostly came down to coalitions dismantling a disgruntled warlord. As I've already mentioned, Yunnan province invaded Sichuan province during the Yuan Shikai days, and the local Sichuan warlords initially welcomed the Yunnanese, siding with them to declare independence. But as you can imagine, the Yunnanese soon seemed to be overbearing, and a lot of soured feelings erupted. This is only further soured when troops from Guizhou came into Sichuan. In 1916, the Sichuan troops were led by General Liu Sunho, who quickly established a ceasefire with Guizhou and the Yunnanese forces. Because of her geography, Sichuan was always relatively isolated from the rest of China. Thus, she turned inwards instead of outwards. For the majority of the warlord period, Sichuan was split into half a dozen districts under military rule. During the late 1920s, even into the 1930s, 5 Sichuan warlords dominated the scene: Yang Sen, Liu Wenhui, Deng Xiho, Tian Songyao, and Liu Xiang. Neither had enough power to take on all the others. Thus, there was a real balance of power at play. In a true Game of Thrones-like fashion, the Sichuan scene was that of warlords forming secret alliances, pitting one against another, but no one ever truly dominated the province. Of the 5 Sichuan warlords, Liu Xiang would be the most influential. Liu Xiang dominated Chongqing and its surrounding areas. His territory straddled the Yangtze River, thus rich in maritime trade. In essence, he wielded significant control over Sichuan's economy. By the 1930s, Sichuan was ruled by Liu Xiang in the east, Liu Xunghong in the northeast adjoining Shanxi, Tian Songyao in the north adjoining Gansu, Deng Xiho in the northwest adjoining Qinghai, and Liu Wenhui in the southwest adjoining Xikang and Yunnan. Within a small central enclave was also Yangtze. After Yuan Shikai's death, the province fell into quite a lot of disorder. All the district governors fought each other, and quite often at that. But they rarely ever crossed the Sichuan border. The common people of Sichuan lived in despair and fear. They nicknamed their petty warlords rotten melons, or crystal monkeys. Liu Xiang was born in 1889 to a modest family. He received a decent education and he joined the military. He rose quickly and he saw a lot of warfare. By 1926, he had established a strong base in Chongqing, which he held on to until his death. Now, the standard troops of Sichuan were lesser than that than other parts of China. The Sichuan armies were funded largely by taxes levied on grain, salt, and opium. Holding Chongqing along the Yangtze, Liu Xiang had an enormous economic base, and thus he managed to enrich himself, and he funded a large army, by Sichuan standards. He enforced strict military discipline, though he was known to turn a blind eye to his officers' rackets. Despite this, Liu Xiang's army had a lot of problems facing bandits in the rural areas. One of the other Sichuan warlords, Yang Sen, was quite flamboyant. His nickname was Ratface, because he had a small mouth. Yang Sen had a small enclave, but it consisted of Chengdu, which he tried to clean up. He paved the streets with flagstones to help increase rickshaw traffic, a rather new concept for many there. Chengdu happened to have a commodity all warlords wanted, an arsenal. So Yang Sen by no means was a poor warlord. While Sichuan seemed to always be in a state of decline, Chengdu in comparison was quite opulent and luxurious. Now again, and I know I keep saying it, I don't want to give up too much of the later stories, but Sichuan province, like many other southern provinces, would join something called the Northern Expedition to help reunify China. Now, despite the warlord era being technically ended in 1928, when China was technically reunified, in reality the warlords were around well into World War II. The Sichuan clique would brush shoulders a lot with Chiang Kai-shek. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, Liu Xiang led the Sichuan 15th Army during the Battle of Shanghai and the 23rd Army Group during the Battle of Nanjing. Later in 1938, he took command of 100,000 soldiers. He took them out of Sichuan to fight the Japanese, showcasing how far he had come as a commander, as well as a warlord. The last clique is the Hunan Warlords, a similar situation to that of Sichuan, just a lot more autonomous. The first prominent Hunan clique member was Tan Yankai, a member of the KMT who became the military governor of Hunan. Tan Yankai had connections amongst Guangxi warlords, allowing him loose control over his province. He tried to arouse the people of Hunan to take active opposition to the northern warlords, but this prompted Yuan Shikai to toss a Hunan-born commander, Fu Liangzuo, to come take his job. Tan Yankai was forced to take the job as civil governor, while Fu would become the warlord. Tan Yankai appealed to his Guangxi buddies for help. Even Tang Jiao of Yunnan asked if he could invade Hunan to help, air quotes, on help, but it never came about. Unfortunately for Tan Yankai, Hunan was right beside the Zhuli clique, and thus would see itself getting engulfed in the Northern Wars. Hunan basically, as a result of geography, was stuck right in the middle of bigger players, and would be tossed around like a rag doll. Tan Yankai would be backstabbed by a subordinate who favored the Zhuli clique. Then later, another KMT member would simply grab up Hunan during the Northern Expedition. To be blunt, to call Hunan a clique is a bit of a stretch in my mind, as it was more of an area that just overlaps with other cliques, and a lot of fighting was done there. For example, most of the Zhuli clique controlled Hunan. Now that basically covers the southern cliques. There's actually a lot more, but I only wanted to talk about the bigger ones, because if I talked about all the smaller ones, we would really get lost in the weeds, as they say. What is really important to know is that there is a north-south divide going on at this time, and it would see two distinct theaters at play. In the north, there was of course the Anhui, Zhuli, and Fengtian cliques that would fight for dominance over Beijing. In the south, many KMT-oriented, communist-oriented, and independent warlords would fight for dominance over Guangzhou, and later on, more rival southern governments would spring up. Typically, the warlord era is taught north to south, and I think this will be the case with us because it's simply more cohesive that way. But I will try to do it in a chronological order, although that seems really impossible because I will continuously be thrown back into 1919 to 1921, and I am saying that because I've literally written 4 episodes ahead of this one as we are speaking, and it's happened about 3 times. Now, as Samuel Jackson once said playing Ray Arnold in Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts, because the warlord era is about to begin. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there, I just released a full documentary on the Opium Wars. It's almost 2 hours long. I will warn you, it was made piecing together some stuff I filmed over 3 years ago, when I could not pronounce a single province in China, and I really cringed looking over it. But I fixed up the audio, added a few more edits into it, and it makes for a pretty good documentary. Please go check it out. And please check out my growing Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where you can find exclusive podcasts. I've had a lot of people join up saying they came from this podcast and the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, so thanks you guys. For as little as just $2, you get access rights to all the exclusive podcasts, of which I think there is now more than 18 of them. Over there, I just released the 2-part series on the wacky Battle of Castle Itter, and I will be putting up a poll soon to see what will be the next podcast. Although, spoiler alert, I do already have something cooking, which looks at how the century of humiliation influenced the People's Republic of China we see today. So if you join up soon, you will be able to vote on what should be the next episode. Give me ideas, what subjects you want to hear more about. Doesn't have to be about the Pacific War. Certainly doesn't need to be in Asia. Can be about anything. So we talked about the Northern Warlords, and now the Southern Warlords. Time to put the Game of Thrones intro music on, as we are soon going to be jumping into a world of cutthroat backstabbing, secret alliances, little fingers, and megalomaniac figures who will fight to reunify China under their own image. As for the Chinese common people, as usual, they will suffer tremendously, continuing the century of humiliation.